So I thought I would do something this year, which is something I haven't normally done at my conferences because I think they're really hard to do well, which is a panel, but this time it's going to be a good panel. And so in order to have a good panel, you need really good people. One of the concepts that we've been talking about over the last couple of days is about this: how do we package and manage open source? And it's very often been from the perspective of a vendor that wants to sort of sell a product or create a service that they package and then get people to buy. Within the world of open source, there is another very interesting and important center of gravity, which is open source foundations. So if you remember Stephen's presentation yesterday, where he said, he showed that people are checking in code to GitHub without having any license at all, which means there's no governance around it. And then later someone might sort of accuse you of stealing their code, even though they put it there without a license. Some people are quite anti open source foundation. There was a piece a couple of years ago written by someone that said, Apache Software Foundation considered harmful because the organization was acting perhaps too slow for them in the way that they would like. I personally think that in order for us to have a sustainable ecosystem of flourishing open source projects, we do need governance. And so I've got some people here that are involved in that. So I would like to introduce Abby Kearns, Executive Director of the Cloud Foundry Foundation. Alexis Richardson, he's my token man on the panel. He is on the technical side at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. He's the reason that the panel's not when I thought it would be. He had some responsibility for childcare, and I think as a conference that is dedicated or thinking about diversity, you have to allow people to look after their kids, so this is why the panel's slightly earlier. So Erica Brescia from Bitnami recently took a role at the Linux Foundation, and we're super happy to have Erica here as well. And then something else really awesome happened. So the Eclipse Foundation has sponsored our diversity scholarship. And thank you to all the scholars for coming. You're incredibly welcome. It adds so much to our events to see a wider range of people joining us. Thanks to the Eclipse Foundation. And Ian and Mike are they've been running this foundation for some time. Ian Skerritt and Mike Milinkovic. They're a little bit old school, but they continue to learn and do interesting things. They didn't have a massive commitment to, perhaps that's unfair. They didn't have a specific role in and around diversity. This week, was it, that they announced they have now got a resource, they've got a person that's trying to encourage diversity in the Eclipse Foundation. That's awesome. And it's even better because they weren't able to make it, so they asked Tracy Miranda to represent the Eclipse Foundation. So Tracy Miranda. So Tracy has an organization, Kichwa Coders, and has been a leading light in the Eclipse Foundation for some time. So I'm super happy to have you all here today. We don't have sort of mics on you all, so we're going to have to do lots of passing around, but I think that's okay. And I think a good place to start would be to say sort of what is your project, or what the project is that you represent, and what do you think your sort of role in the world is?
I don't know how to answer that last question, but so as James so eloquently said, I am the Executive Director for Cloud Foundry Foundation. We are an open source foundation for a cloud application platform that we think is fundamentally changing the way developers think about infrastructure and their connective tissue to that. So I don't know what about our place in the world, though. It seems like a very philosophical question.
Well, it's a philosophical conference.
I don't know. I think it's too early to have that, isn't it?
Okay, well maybe...
Before the beer seems a hard time to have that conversation.
Okay. So what is Cloud Foundry, I guess, would be a useful thing?
It is a cloud application platform. I'm purposefully avoiding the word PaaS, platform as a service, or as was said last week, I believe that PaaS is dead. But I mean, I think PaaS and what we think about platforms and what we think about the value of platforms is evolving and evolving and necessarily evolving. And really, I've been shifting the moniker to cloud application platform because at the end of the day, what do we really care about is the ability to develop code and get it to production fast. That's all we care about. Or I think, Alexis, you said it well last week about infrastructure is boring and we shouldn't care about it. So.
I don't care about it.
Right, see? There he goes. Alexis doesn't care about it.
Developers do. But, so, Erica, I'm quite interested in that. I mean, I'm interested in why you took a role within an open source foundation when you're obviously quite busy as the COO of an organization that's fast growing and doing interesting work.
Yeah, and a mom too, which, you know, is a job in itself. So I joined the Linux Foundation. I've known Jim Zemlin and a lot of folks at the Linux Foundation. Do most people know what the Linux Foundation is? No? Okay. So the Linux Foundation supports the development of Linux. It employs Linus Torvalds and has basically guaranteed him a job for life to further the development of Linux. And it's also an umbrella foundation in home. I should have the stats. I'm a pretty new board member, so I don't know exactly how many projects are under it. Oh, God, that's embarrassing. Thanks, Abby. So it's 48 projects, apparently. But like the Cloud Native Computing Foundation and a bunch of other foundations are part of the Linux Foundation. It's supported by almost every major company. And interestingly, Microsoft just joined as the highest level partner recently, which is a pretty significant moment. And I think, you know, their thinking has changed for a long time, but that was particularly exciting for me. And the idea is not only to further the development of Linux, but to give kind of a home to great open source projects and also to further best practices around them. And probably a lot of people in this room kind of understand really what open source is and what it means to be open source, and there are probably a very wide range of opinions on that as well. But a lot of companies that are newer to open source need a lot of hand-holding, and I think the Linux Foundation at least is striving to do that work and to help people understand what it means to have good governance and to build and run an effective open source project. And I joined, they actually came and approached me to join. They're working towards, you know, having a more diverse board too. It was what you might expect, which is mostly older white men on the board. And they brought me and Nithya Ruff, who's awesome, on as well. The reason I joined is because I think they're really looking for a bit of a kind of fresh perspective and a way to reach out to more of the kind of startup ecosystem and help those companies understand what it means to be open source and how to get involved. And obviously they're interested in expanding the number of participants in their projects. And I was part of Y Combinator, which is an accelerator out in California. And obviously through that, I have a lot of ties to the startup ecosystem. And I think the work they're doing is really important and felt like I might be able to bring a different perspective to a lot of people on the board. So I've only had one boarding meeting so far, but they're doing really good work. They're doing a lot of work around diversity, which is super cool too. And it's really exciting to be a part of. And, you know, for me personally, it's been a great learning experience so far.
Right, hello everyone. So I've been working with open source for many, many years, probably about 15. So at first it was in the corporate environment, then in a startup, and then finally I decided to go it alone. So that was about 10 years ago. So when I first started in open source on my own, it was working with companies, and it was mostly hardware companies, so people making FPGAs, people making microprocessors or whatever kind of chip. And they'd heard of open source, and they wanted to use it. So they'd come to me, and they'd be like, we know open source is free, so can we use it and cut costs? So my job was to sort of say, well, yes, it is free, but it's free like a free puppy. So you still have to feed it and train it and take care of it. So it became my job to basically train it and teach it new tricks and make sure that the puppies played with the other puppies well. And you could be sure that, you know, if their open source puppy pooped on the carpet, I got to hear about it. So I'm glad to say in 10 years, things have changed quite a lot in terms of people's understanding of open source. And yeah, I think it's really important just to keep making open source more convenient. I think it kills me every time someone says they pick convenience, and it means that they ditch openness. So it's trying to say, well, how can we make sure open stays convenient so it's not competing with that?
Could you say a bit about what Eclipse is and how it's changing what it will be?
Yes. Okay, who's heard of the Eclipse IDE? Yeah, lots of hands. Okay. Who's heard of the Eclipse Che project? A few hands, but still good. Who's heard about Eclipse IoT? Oh, pretty good. Who's heard about the Eclipse January project? Nobody. That's the one I'm that's the one I'm a committer on. Anyway, I'm just trying to gauge because Eclipse started off 15 years ago as the Java IDE. And from that, it sort of turned into, you know, the IDE for any language, and then a platform for any language. And it's evolved quite a lot. And today, it's actually turned into a bunch of different communities, including the Internet of Things working group, which has nothing to do with IDEs. So that's a branding and packaging problem all in its own. But we also have a science working group. I'm on the committee for that. And we have a systems engineering group. So we've got all these different reincarnations of people in open source coming to work together in these areas. And so it's quite a big evolution, but it's also quite hard to manage that when people have sort of a fixed idea of what Eclipse is. So, yeah.
What's the CNCF and what's it about?
Badly named organization.
Is it a French role?
CNCF stands for Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which is one of those things that's so long that by the time you get halfway through, you kind of fall asleep. It's like, it's part of the Linux Foundation, which is to open source as Amazon is to cloud. And that makes it, you know, the right home for what CNCF aims to do, which is to create a commons of tools for the next generation of cloud-native applications, which of course raises the question, WTF is cloud-native? Cloud-native is applications that can run in the cloud, but can also run on your own machines, i.e. both are portable, flexible, scalable, essentially the modern architectures that are pioneered by people like Netflix, Twitter, Google, etc. And they are important for the reason that Abby mentioned, which is everybody wants to go faster. They look at Netflix and they go, how is it that this company came from nowhere, disrupted an entire industry with a simple idea that you put somebody's TV on their computer in their living room so that whenever they feel like doing something, they think, oh, I could watch a movie. And then you make it always on, incredibly convenient just to do that one thing, which their CEO calls the point of decision. And then you build an entire business out of it. And so everyone's thinking, wow, if we could do that with our hotels business, that'd be really cool. And then you get Airbnb. And it's just happened again and again and again. And now the rest of the world is trying to catch up. So there is a terrible need for tools that we can all use and trust, and education on how to use them. And those tools go by the names of projects like Kubernetes, Prometheus, FluentD, Linkerd, Open Tracing, and there will be more in the future. They're all, you may not have heard of some of these things. We had an awesome presentation from FluentD marketing lead yesterday. Kyoto, thanks for that. But you'll hear more about them in the future because these are the tools of tomorrow's apps. So CNCF is there to figure out which ones to promote and get them working with other projects, including some of the projects represented by people to my left.